Hello and welcome. Today we cover Rome's expansion. Rome's expansion. Its early days from Republic, I think, was 509 BC when it was first founded as a republic. And it lasted until 27 BC as the first Caesar took over and as an emperor of Rome. But for this roughly 500-year period of Rome's republic, there was a period of rapid expansion in the structures of the Roman state, the statecraft, the diplomacy, the military structures, the military vehicles, all propelled Rome to be the dominant power in the Mediterranean, and it just kept growing, right? It just kept growing. So today's talk is Rome's expansion. The aside is that in our past lecture on Rome, what is a republic? Roman history. We talked about the strength of a republic. Remember, the strength of a republic is vesting as many adult property-owning males as possible into the state and into the republic and into the system of government so that they could serve in the military, they could vote, they could serve as praetors, they could serve as executives, they could serve as senators. All these things, all these vested interests, and the careerism of these Romans in this republic led to their ambitions dovetailing with the state and the state carrying further into the future and realizing the dream that is Rome, the dream that was Rome. The thesis is that Rome, having the strength burgeoning from its republican structure circa 509 BC, began through foreign policy and statecraft to subsume its Italian neighbors. The Punic Wars with Carthage, 3 in total between 264 BC and 146 BC, established naval supremacy. The Macedonian Wars between 214 BC and 148 BC over the Greek allies established supremacy in the Mediterranean. And through diplomacy and the structure of the republic, state and their state, the careers, the consuls, the praetors. Remember, the consuls are like the presidents in Rome. There's 2 of them initially in the republic. 2 consuls elected every year by the Senate. And the military of the Romans added to their territory steadily to a zenith, with a zenith that peaked actually after Rome ceased to be a republic under, I think, Hadrian, I think in the 2nd century AD. Point 1. As Adrian Goldsworthy, the book I'm reading, Pax Romana, he says, all nations practice statecraft. Rome was just the best, and it subsumed its neighbors, and it subsumed every other power underneath against it, right? It used diplomacy to assuage the Italian nations. But all nations were doing this. All nations would make alliances for a pretext for war. They would make protectorates. They would try to subsume neighbors. They'd gain allies, and they'd try to work together against other common enemies. All nations practiced statecraft, but only Rome was a solid republic, I believe. I think that's right. I think only Rome was a republic the way that it was structured, the way that its democracy and its republic was structured. Remember, as we discussed, the combination of the executive and the legislative, and the branch, the levels of government, the executive, the Senate, the higher branch of the legislature, and the lower branch of the lower representatives of the Roman Republic. All nations practice statecraft, but Rome just happened to have the stable structures, as we'll get into below in point 2. It subsumed its neighbors through diplomacy. So with its Italian neighbors, it says, why don't we gain together in common defense? And they didn't always get along with their Italian neighbors. Sometimes they were at war with their Italian neighbors. There's many wars that Rome had to go through, many triumphs and near defeats and total defeats in some cases, as in the Second Punic War under Hamilton. The Second Punic War, Hannibal attacked Rome in the Second Punic War and almost destroyed Rome, and actually attacked Rome itself, I believe it was, with his elephants. But all nations, Carthage, Macedonia, as you know, with Macedonia, Alexander the Great conquered much of Persia and much of the known world at that time. So all nations practice statecraft. It's just that Rome had, as we'll get into point two, the manpower, resources, and careerism, especially military governor careerism. So a man couldn't serve as a praetor. A praetor was a lower executive magistrate that would be in charge of the military and governing certain areas and settlements. The praetors had to have a minimum 10-year military service to become eligible to become a praetor, and the consuls were usually senators and rich, wealthy men that had served in the military for many, many years, at least a decade, and they became elevated because of their military prowess, their careerism, and then they become governors later on. They become governors, and they would. But we're talking about the early age of expansion in the republic, from when it was founded to the wars that it fought through. But in all these wars, just note that in all these wars, the manpower because you have so many adult males invested in the property of the state, the manpower, the resources, the monies, the food stuffs, the military equipment, the swords, the gear, the resources, and especially the careerism and the military careerism really propelled Rome with its stable structures of republican governance, and the careerism it propelled it to be the most powerful force on the Italian peninsula. And then once it had taken the Italian peninsula, it then projected outward towards North Africa and Greece. So point 3, the Pyrrhic War was one. The Pyrrhic War, you may have heard of what a Pyrrhic victory. A Pyrrhic victory is when somebody wins a battle but they lose the war. There's actually a general named Pyrrhus who, between the years 280 BC and 275 BC, he attacked Rome. But the Romans were defeated in battle, and that Pyrrhus defeated them in battle, but he lost more and more men. It's too costly. His expedition came over from Greece and the Greek allies, and they kept attacking Rome. But the Romans were so determined and had so many resources, and they kept persisting through defeats to throw more men at Pyrrhus, until finally 5 years later he couldn't continue his warfare any longer, and he surrendered, or he left the Italian peninsula. But just the superior resources, superior manpower, because you have a republic, you can draw on more citizens, more adult owning property males to serve in the military as citizens and be citizenship, accrue property, and lend their expertise. Human capital should never be underestimated. That's why the American Republic is the most powerful nation in the world, because of human capital, because what the citizens can do for the republic and what the republic can do for the citizens. So with the Pyrrhic victory, the Romans they were so determined to win, they threw all their. And you can imagine, as a man becomes a veteran of many wars and he gains expertise, and you give him a station in society, in a generalship or a governorship, and command over the military, he becomes a very effective general. Like Scipio defeated the Carthaginians on their own territory in North Africa, right? So, point 4, Carthage. The Punic Wars was total warfare. And it's famously that the Romans copied the boats, a boat that ran ashore in Carthage. The Romans copied it and reproduced it, and then created much naval warfare, and they defeated the Carthage. The Punic Wars were, when were they fought? I mentioned them in the beginning. Between 264 BC and 146 BC, there was 3 of them. In the second one, Hannibal invaded northern Italy through the Alps and through Spain. He crossed from North Africa over into north of Italy, so he went all the way around North Africa, through Spain, through the Alps, and into northern Italy. But there's 3 Punic Wars. The second one, Carthage, is probably the most total when Hannibal invaded Italy. But they eventually invaded and defeated Carthage on their own ground, and then eventually they burned Carthage to the ground and salted the earth and killed all the citizens. Some of these wars were very brutal. The Romans alternated between diplomacy, being civil, and being very barbaric and being very total warfare, right? Total warfare. Point 5. Allies and protectorate states form to buttress Rome, supplied ancillary soldiers. So actually, a lot of the allies, a lot of states actually asked for Rome to be their protectorates, to be protectorates of Rome. But the allies, in the early stages of the Republic, all the allies they didn't even have to pay taxes, and they kept sovereignty over their own laws. But what these allies actually provided was ancillary soldiers, auxiliary soldiers, to the Roman army. That's the only thing they were called on to do, is provide auxiliary soldiers. And eventually the Italians formed all the legionaries. All the primary armored soldiers were legionaries of the Italian persuasion of Latin peoples on the Italian peninsula, whereas the allies were always auxiliary, and the skirmishers and some horse and some auxiliary troops. But the allies in many protectorate states actually asked Rome to protect them. And Rome would often, alternating with diplomacy, sometimes they'd want a pretext for war, so it was nefarious, their purposes were nefarious, and they would ally somebody so they could go to war with somebody else. But often, when they're subsuming other countries and subsuming other nations, they seek to gain status and to gain power, extend their reign by getting more allies, getting more territories to be their protectorate. Point 6, finally, largely peace was the result. That's the surprising part. That you've heard that expression, mostly peaceful. These wars were mostly peaceful. Actually, in Rome, that's kind of true. Although I think like 10 million people died under a Roman sword total. Most of the provinces, eventually in the full state of the Roman Empire, was mostly peaceful. Rome, by preserving its power, preserved most peace. Sometimes they were very harsh and slaughtered people to control them and to put down rebellions, mostly to put down rebellions and to put down raiders and put down threats to their checks to their power. But largely, once they conquered, peace was the result. Smaller states wanted Roman protection, and the smaller states retained sovereignty and little to no taxes. All they had to do is provide auxiliary soldiers. So you can see why the Romans expanded so rapidly. They were the most effective at statecraft. They had the structures and the powers and the human capital of the republic, the social utility and human capital of the republic, to draw upon manpower and resources and careerism. And when you get, like I say, when you're developing human capital, when a soldier has been in so many battles, he's a veteran, or he's a general, he's a veteran general, that's a very valuable asset. And so Rome alternated careerism of these generals, these men of property, allowed them to own property in Rome, allowed them to hold consul office, praetor office, magistrate office, eventually be governors. We'll be talking about how Rome governed when it governed. We'll talk about how Rome governed, and we'll talk about how Rome, the specific military structure of Rome, in future short episodes shortly here. But for today's talk, the expansion of Rome, for all these reasons covered here, is that it expanded. It went through many major conflicts, but it came out victorious and the dominant power in the Mediterranean. So, and then eventually the Roman Empire after 27 BC. So with this, I'll leave you my peace I give you. In Jesus' name, I hope this is good for you. It's good for me. For further talks, amen. God bless. Bye-bye.